Now we're going to talk about sampling, and sampling is sort of who's in your study and who's not in your study is a nice way to think about it. And you're going to start with sort of a big group of people, which is called your population, and you're going to sort of get again that funnel idea of narrowing it down. So your target population might be all people who do this between this year or this program or took part in this program during this year or are impacted by this policy during this year. And then you're going to sort of narrow it down to your sampling frame. Who's actually going to be drawn from that population? What are the characteristics that include them in your study, and then who's actually going to be in your study. And one of the good things to think about, and we use this a lot when we do medical research, is we talk about the inclusion and the exclusion criteria. So it might be all people between the ages of 18 to 25 who are medically stable, who are non-compliant, who presented to the emergency medicine department between these dates. That's who's included. And give consent. You always say who gave consent. Now the exclusion criteria are all those people outside of that criteria. So again, you started with a big patient population of people who are medically non-compliant. And then you narrow it down to people who are medically non-compliant, and there's the dates they came in. And then these are specifically the people who are in the study. And then the exclusion criteria are people who are not in the study. That way the sort of reader of literature, and you'll see this a lot, you should see this when you do your lit review of who's included and who's excluded. That's really, really important. But within that sort of setting up the parameters, there's also different ways of sampling people, and there are different parameters, and there's different ways to sample. The best and the greatest is to get a random sample. Right now, a random sample isn't always everybody has an equal chance of getting in, and we randomly generate numbers. It could be if you're doing patient charts, you randomly generate all the numbers of people in the charts, and you randomly generate numbers. You can do this on Excel, and it tells you a certain number of numbers that it generated, and you pick those people that include in your study from those numbers, right? So you still get a random sample of everybody within that patient population, within those patient records. That's a way to do a random sample. So there's lots of different ways to do a random sample. It's not as hard as you think, but you sort of have to do the parameters of who's in the study, and you have to generate random numbers to do that. You can't always do that. That's a problem. Sometimes you want to do a stratified sample, and what that is it's adequately representing the selected population. So you're going to do a stratified sample of not everybody, but of people between these years or this time frame, right? So it's stratified. I'm going to take 200 people from we did this with one study. We're looking at the Affordable Care Act. I'm going to look at people coming into the ER and how they pay. And I'm going to take 200 people from each year since the Affordable Care Act happened, right? So it's not a random sample of the entire population, but it's a stratified from each year. Another thing is proportional. So you might want to do members of the population that are stratified in your study proportional to how they exist in the world. So if we have almost 30% of the population within Mount Sinai who is Hispanic, then we're going to stratify and get 30% of those people in the sample. If 70% are African American, then 70% of my sample will be in there. And again, your lit review will sort of guide you about how you want to get this sample and what kind of samples you want, depending on what your research question is and your hypothesis. So again, all that stuff in the beginning helps feed how you sample. There's also a disproportionate sample, right? So you want to oversample, so to speak, and disproportionately take out people. So I want to look at potentially another study we're doing is I want to look at all the people, all the children who were infants that had sepsis when they were born. I'm only going to look at them. I'm not going to look at every infant born. So it's a disproportionate amount of people I'm going to look at. They're not necessarily represented in the population, so they're not proportionally represented. I'm only looking at people from a specific incident, so that could be a disproportionate amount. There are also lots of different other kinds of samples, right? You can't always do a random sample. You might have to do a non-probability sample. So you're just looking at, you don't know how representative that sample is in a bigger population, so you have to sort of do different ways of getting at them. One of the things sometimes is a convenient sample, and the best way I talk about that is whoever shows up through the door who says yes, they're the convenient sample, right? They have to give consent, but they are convenient on that specific day, that specific time. Another thing that when we have really hard to get at populations, we have to do something called a snowball sample. So if I was trying to look at people who, IV drug users who don't come to needle exchanges that are female and Latina. We know they're not going to come to the needle exchange for free, so I can't really see what impact that program has on them, and I don't understand if it's beneficial to them or not, or if they're getting any benefits from this program, and they may be a hard to reach population. So I might ask, one person who I do know is coming to this needle exchange program. Can you let me know about your other friends? And again, it does get into ethical issues. It is very difficult to get through the IRB for a good reason. And they might tell us other friends who do it, and then I would contact those other friends. Again, because I need to know if this program is impactful and if I need to change the way I produce and provide the program so that I can have health benefits for this very specific population who I might have identified as my research question, because I know that they're not getting access to clean needles, and I want to change the program to make sure it has a helpful benefit for them, because we already have established it's got a great benefit, right? But again, if I'm looking at a very specific population and they're very hard to get to, I might have to do what's called a snowball sample. And some of the literature from the reading for this week will also have other ways of getting to people. But you kind of have to think about, how am I getting at my sample? What's the best way? And again, the Lit Review really is helpful for this. You can always email me if you have questions. But these are sort of the main ways we get at samples.